Distinguished guests, esteemed speakers, and friends, it's my privilege to welcome you to this much anticipated discussion on Global Tumult India as a Pole Star by Ambassador Sujan Chinoy. We are gathered here today at a time when the world stands at a crossroads, faced with challenges of ideological divides, geopolitical tensions, and the weaponization of trade and technology. Yet, amidst this global disorder, India has emerged as a source of stability and vision, offering a path rooted in resilience, inclusivity, and its timeless ethos of Vasudeva Kutumbaka, the belief that the world is one family. Ambassador Chinoy's book is both timely and incisive, offering an expert's perspective on India's evolving role in the international arena. As the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis, his insights into India's foreign and defense policies are invaluable. Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star, not only chronicles recent geopolitical developments, but also envisions how India can shape a more secure, self-reliant, and progressive world order amidst an era of uncertainty. We are honored to have with us a distinguished panel to discuss this important work. Professor Amitabh Muttu, a leading voice in international politics, will chair the session. Joining him are Sri Sanjoy Joshi, Chairman of the Observer Research Foundation, and the author himself, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, whose illustrious career and sharp analysis have consistently enriched our understanding of global dynamics. With this, may I request Professor Amitabh Muttu for his introductory remarks and then thereafter to take the session forward. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Usha Munshi and the India International Center for doing me this honor of inviting me to chair this extremely important session. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and fellow thinkers of the India International Center, I am honored and delighted, as I said, to be part of this panel with Ambassador Sujan Chinoy and Dr. Joshi, who's, of course, the chairman of the Observer Research Foundation. Today's discussion really revolves around this book, Global Tumult, India as a Pole Star, but more fundamentally around the thinking of a remarkable figure whose insights have in recent years significantly shaped contemporary discourse on international relations and India's strategic position in the world. Sujan Chinoy, a former distinguished ambassador to Japan, to Mexico, and to which other country, sir?
There are some
few other countries. Yes, and
most of my life is spent in China.
Japan, Mexico, China, and he served, including in Sydney. And this experience has meant that his career has been dedicated to understanding and enhancing India's role in the global stage. And it has provided him with a unique perspective on the intricate dynamics of diplomacy and international stage. I knew him a little from his role in both Japan and in Australia, but I've watched him carefully in his role over the past few years as the Director General of the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Studies and Analysis. I can say this as the Dean of a neighbor institute, the School of International Studies, that Chinoy has demonstrated tremendous leadership in leading what is perhaps India's foremost think tank, although that might be disputed by my speaker on the left. But under his guidance, the institute has flourished and in fact increased its niche as the pivotal platform for research and dialogue on India's defense policies and strategic interests. This role has not only allowed him to influence policy discussions, which include direct interventions with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office, but also to mentor the next generation of scholars and policymakers, because that's the task that comes most naturally to me. But I also see how important it is for those who leave, say, the School of International Studies, to be placed in bodies where they can see intellectual and personal mobility. His contributions in this capacity have highlighted the importance of informed debate and critical analysis in shaping India's future. And that is why this book is important, not only as a big statement on international affairs, but also as coming from someone who has shaped policy, who is leading policy, and who continues to be one of the leaders of thinking on international relations. This collection is a collection of really timely and topical essays that delve into India's strategic landscapes. Many of these essays have been previously published, some in newspapers like the Indian Express, but others in collections of books. Yet they continue to resonate with the current geopolitical climate, as Ms. Munshi pointed out. It is in the introductory essay on strategic autonomy that Sujan Chinoy lays out his, what the Germans used to call a Weltanschauung, which is a worldview, and how he dissects the term of strategic autonomy and how he differentiates it from the concept of non-alignment is a value addition in intellectual terms, which is itself worthy of reading, irrespective of whether you read the rest of the essays or not. That essay, which comes like a preface to the book, is essential reading for anyone student of international affairs. I particularly enjoyed his essay also on Vedanta as a strategic guide, which is I would like him to expand on this, because this is something that we in the School of International Studies have been looking into, introspecting, because this provides the philosophical framework for understanding of India's role and India's pivotal role and India's pole star role in a changing world. But what Chinoy has done in this essay has enriched the discussion around contemporary strategy by urging a deeper connection between ancient Indian wisdom and modern geopolitical challenges. The whole idea, in some ways, of Vedanta is deeply linked to the idea of strategic autonomy, especially if you believe in Atmanirbharta as essentially, Atmanirbharta and foreign policy is essentially synonymous with strategic autonomy. And the manner in which Sujan Chinoy expands on Vedanta reminds me of the manner in which I think the previous president of the India International Center, Dr. Karan Singh, often describes the Vedanta guide to Hindu philosophy as essentially, as we all know, divided into 3 different or 4 different paths. One through bhakti, the other through gyan, the third through karma, and fourth through the practice of yoga. In some ways, and he talks about how the modern representation, or the most striking representation of Gyan Yoga is Maharana Ramana Maharishi, of Bhakti Yoga is Ramakrishna Paramahans, of Karma Yoga is Vivekananda, and of yoga as a physical practice of Sri Aurobindo. In similar terms, sir, I would request you perhaps to expand and look at the landscape of India's foreign policy and draw out on how these expressions of Vedanta can find articulation through the foreign policy that India is been exercising over the last few years. I feel that Sujan Chinoy's contributions are also shining, especially on the China question. And as someone who has just returned from Taiwan, I find his essay on Taiwan, assessing the US regional posture, as deeply interesting, and also the essay on Chinese whispers, dragons, shenanigans on Arunachal Pradesh, particularly at a time when now there seems to be apparent thaw in Sino-Indian relations. I would like him to perhaps expand on whether he thinks this thaw is just a tactical ploy by Beijing to perhaps numb India into complacency and not really a strategic shift from its hardline posture. In conclusion, let me say that Sujan Chinoy's contribution to the debate on India as a pole star and India's role in the world in general are tremendous. His book, in that sense, is not just a collection of essays. It's a clarion call for all of us, those interested in foreign policy and those concerned citizens, to have a more nuanced understanding of India's strategic identity. As a nation, to use his words, seeks to establish itself as a pole star in a tumultuous global landscape, it is important to engage with the insights that he draws in this book. The discussion which follows my introductory remarks will undoubtedly pave the way for a thoughtful dialogue and informed policy making in the years to come. Embracing many of these ideas of the book will help India navigate its path towards a future defined by strategic autonomy and resilience. Let us, therefore, continue to explore these questions raised by Ambassador Sujan Chinoy in this remarkable book, Global Tumult, together and foster a dialogue that is rich and vibrant and that shapes the future of our nation. And let me, on that note, invite Ambassador Chinoy first to talk about the book, and thereafter Sri Sanjay Joshi to be the first discussant. Ambassador Sujan Chinoy.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Professor Amitabh Mattu, for your very warm, gracious, perceptive, and generous words introducing both me and this effort that I've made to write a book, so to speak, which is essentially a compilation of a few of my writings, as well as new chapters that I wrote as the book was developing. I'm extremely grateful to Mr. Sanjay Joshi, the president of ORF as well, because the presence of these two luminaries adds luster to this evening's event, even if I and my book combined together do not in the same manner. So I'm very grateful to the two of you and to the IIC for organizing this, to my many friends and colleagues who are here this evening. I owe a debt of gratitude. Now, why did I write the book? I think, frankly, all former Foreign Service officers and ambassadors are generally under pressure to come up with a book or two. And I must confess that I was no different. I also felt that after a lifetime spent in the Foreign Service and several years as DG of IDSA, I should also put together some thoughts. And I realized that I had one unique advantage, which was to be in a vantage point as DG IDSA, where this track 1.5 kind of niche perch that I had offered me a view which I couldn't conceivably have had either as track 1 or as track 2. And the freedom to express myself was an added bonus. By the way, I take credit not just for the contents of the book, but also for the cover. which I have designed myself, which is not normal. And so if you don't give me any credit for its contents, you do please give me credit for the cover page. Do please judge the book by its cover, in this case. Having said that, let me say that I approached a number of people, friends of mine like Tony Abbott, who I had befriended through my years of engagement of Australia, Jose Antonio Meade Curibreña, the former foreign minister and former presidential candidate in Mexico, and of course your colleague, Mr. Joshi, that's Dr. Samir Saran. But I had also requested an American scholar to give me a blurb, and I will not identify the scholar, but the scholar refused, despite being a good friend and despite our having a mutually healthy respect for each other. And the reason that was cited was that I was trying to promote India as a pole star. And I was astounded by that statement, and especially that I had tried to approach IR through the lens of Indian civilization. I had even a chapter on approaching IR through Vedant. This was simply not acceptable from the Western IR perspective. So that showed me that it was time to sound the trumpet, the clarion, and give out a clarion call for looking at things from our own civilizational point of view. Now, today, as Professor Mattu has already stated, the global situation is in flux, it's drifting towards multipolarity. We are not quite there. And in the course of the book, it is not just strategic autonomy that I have tried to explore, but also the definitional impediments and hurdles when we talk of, for example, the great powers, middle powers, the global south, BRICS. These are all very confusing terms, though they are bandied about all the time. For example, to my mind, it's very hard to define a great power today. If we link it to being permanent members of the UN Security Council, there is still, lack of logic there. Because if we go by, for example, the yardstick of possession of nuclear weapons, then the fact is that when this inequitable, grouping was founded in 1945, only one major power had nuclear weapons at that point of time. That's the United States of America. The others, whether it's the Soviet Union or the UK or France, acquired them much later. To me, that suggests that the acquisition of nuclear weapons was an extension of the privileged power that they enjoyed as members of the UN Security Council. And if we look at GDP today, then apart from the United States, China, Germany, Japan, it should be India that should be in the UN Security Council. If we look at per capita GDP, then of course we are talking of states like not just the US, but also Luxembourg, Ireland, Qatar, and UAE, who should be in the UN Security Council. So what does it take to be defined today as a great power? That's the big question. I've tried to address it. Middle powers are equally difficult to define. And I hate to consider India a middle power because I think we are definitely somewhere between a middle power and a great power. We may not have certain other attendant qualities and characteristics of a great power, primarily the absence of a UNSC membership. But we have everything else that is called for, including the world's largest population, the world's fastest growing economy, the fact that we contribute in such a prolific and profound manner to UN peacekeeping operations around the world, and that we in our neighborhood or an extended neighborhood have also emerged as first responder or a net security provider, so to speak. And a lot of this is being done by India, not so much as to project itself as a Vishwa Guru. I think that is the kiss of death. It's more as a Vishwa Bandhu or a Vishwa Mitra. Nobody today in the global south, ill-defined as it is really keen on hierarchy. Nobody wants leaders. In fact, we have seen the exercise of strategic autonomy is in fact a very clear demonstration of the fact that even lesser powers today, no matter which part of the world, are able to equalize with bigger powers and bridge the gaps in absolute comprehensive national power through asymmetrical means also, which is why President Trump would fly out and have a round table with Kim Jong-un. So smaller powers today are able to equalize in different ways, and that's a strategic power that's being, autonomy that's being exercised by one and all. Now, for me, NAM, non-aligned movement, actually promoted disengagement, distancing oneself from various issues and power centers, whereas strategic autonomy, the type that India exercises, is actually an instrument for engaging all, not disengagement from all. Now, the other theme that I've tried to explore here is about global powers. We're all very fond of saying that the international order is undergoing change, it's in flux, and it's neither bipolar nor unipolar, not completely multipolar. But then what is it really? To my mind, global powers can neither be made nor dismantled easily. The order, global orders that we have seen in the past have all come from cataclysmic events, from war and death and destruction, and the one that we currently inherit as legacy since 1945, beg your pardon, is just that. It has emerged from the destruction of the Second World War. So it is not wishful thinking or even pressure that really works, and which is why the UN Security Council has failed to reform since 1965, when it was for the first and last time that the non-permanent category was enhanced from 6 to 10, and the total membership went up from 11 to 15. And the only way to really have a new global order is to wish for complete death and destruction all around, from the ashes of which phoenix-like might rise, hopefully, some new order. So that is unthinkable today. Nobody really wants that. And a country like India is not challenging the fundamental existence of the current global order. We are trying to seek genuine reforms of this order. India's advocacy is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Our challenge to the global order is different from the kind of challenge that China poses to the global order from a position of privilege within that order, for it seeks to put itself in the driving seat with regard to the agenda. India's case is slightly different. As far as the global south is concerned, very quickly, I wanted to say that it's very hard to define. There is no, criterion in place, and we have many things to go by. We can look at the old notion of the non-aligned movement, which was more ideological and political, distancing from two ideological and conflicting and contesting camps. We can look at it from the point of view of the G77, which then takes you to actually a list of countries, which has now since then expanded to 134. And there is something called G77 plus China also. Or we can look at the Brandt line, the Willy Brandt line of the 60s, when the then Chancellor of Germany had tried to divide the world into two halves, the northern being the more prosperous and the southern being the less prosperous, pejoratively called the third world at that time, or developing countries. And we can see there that there are contradictions, because if Israel belonged to the global north by being in the south, we also had countries like Singapore, UAE, and Qatar that logically belong to the global north. So it's very difficult today, and I think we should leave it at that. There should be no attempt made to give a structure to the global south, and there should certainly be a certain wariness about privileged members of the UN Security Council like China wanting to come and be associated with the global south. That's like putting the fox in charge of the chicken pen. And as far as BRICS is concerned, I wanted to say that, it's a platform which runs the real danger today of becoming anti-West. India is a non-Western country, but it's not an anti-West country. And the fact that the BRICS is currently being spearheaded by large countries, mostly inimical to Western interests like China and Russia, therefore infuses this risk into the BRICS. The BRICS is still much smaller in terms of its economic power as compared to the G7, and by far only 1/3 of what the G20 means at around 90, trillion dollars. I think the future really lies for India, not necessarily in the SCO and the BRICS, but more in the context of broader structures, more inclusive and more democratic structures like the G20. China's rise is a huge disruptor in my view. For never before in history have we seen, in a short span of 40 years, telescoped within that short frame of time, such fundamental changes and transformations as we have seen in China. And as it has changed, it has also spilled over beyond its periphery into neighboring regions. From their point of view, logically, from our point of view, in a very sort of non-transparent and disrupting manner. Broadly speaking, China was never a neighbor till 1950. Yeah, at least not a geographical neighbor. It was a civilizational neighbor, and we have to deal with it as Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel in his prescient letter of 7 November 1950 had also forewarned Pandit Nehru that now for the first time in history you have this major power and you'll have to deal with this power. Now we've had this very difficult relationship, but as for the thaw, I don't think it's really a thaw in that fundamental sense. The core issues remain. But, it actually does denote some forward-looking steps. That is to say, after nearly 5 years of military confrontation, eyeball-to-eyeball kind of, disposition and deployments on both sides, we are now looking at, reducing that tension in the border areas. I think for me, it's a remarkable achievement that China, given its known positions on the border, for the first time in my view, in my career, dealing and watching this subject, has actually agreed to, restart Indian access to patrolling points claimed by India. This is, in my view, for the very first time. I want to end the China bit with just a teaser. In fact, in an internal note, when Galwan happened, I had assessed that, please remember that the Chinese throughout history have a tremendous capacity and a classic, method, modus operandi, to first put pressure, it could even be artificial pressure, and then to give you relief, such that when you heave a sigh of relief at the end of that pressure, you've forgotten all about the real issues. You are actually grateful and thankful that the pressure that was put on you has been taken off, that weight is off your shoulders. In that, sometimes is lost the core issue. We have to be mindful of that. The core issues still remain very much in place. India's moment has come. I think it's the kintsugi moment, as we say in Japan, when the Japanese, have a broken vase, for example, and they put it together with gold and repair it. The gold itself adds a new luster and value to that broken vase. And I think India is today providing that kintsugi, that vein and thread of gold to mend a fractured global consensus on a number of issues. And I think we should value that. Lastly, a couple of words on Vedant. In my view, it's quite stunning to see that there is an interconnectedness between this whole idea of the Brahman and the Atman, the interconnectedness of things, and the interconnectedness at the global level today, in the global order. For we are all connected, and globalization is a genie that cannot be put back into the bottle. You can redefine it, you can reinvent it, you can create new definitional terms and firewalls, but it's something that will exist. And so when India takes a step to promote something like the Green Grids Initiative, which is also known by its acronym OSOWOG, we are actually talking about the entire world coming together like the Atman and working towards that final goal of integration with the Brahman. There are other thoughts like Sarvodaya, for example, which to my mind is very relevant today to the global south, that is upliftment of all, leaving no one behind. Sarvodaya informs our policy even now, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. The concept of Atmanirbharta is embedded in strategic autonomy. Swarajya is also there in strategic autonomy, as we have seen from our own history. And for me, again, Dharma Yuddha. That is to say, a country like India that fundamentally espouses the principles of peace and non-violence is not going to balk at the idea of defending itself, its sovereignty, its territorial integrity. And even Gandhiji, that great apostle of peace, had said that if he had to choose between violence and cowardly flight, he would rather choose violence. So we have that. Finally, India is following, in my view, the Sattvic principle of connecting with the rest of the world and dealing with the rest of the world. And there are certain perils in trying to adopt Rajasic policies or Tamasic policies. Rajasic policy, for me, denotes selfishness, an endeavor, an attempt to dominate others. It's part of the Mandala theory. It's part of Kautilya and Arthashastra. But Rajasic doesn't endear you to neighbors or to lesser powers. As I told you, in a flatter world, lesser powers also do not want hierarchies. They are all seeking a more equitable structure. If you have a Tamasic policy, like some of our neighbors have, that either implies a certain degree of passivity or ignorance, and some of our, I'm blunt about this, some of our smaller neighbors fall into that category. They fail to see where their interests lie in the future. So Sattvic it is for me. Anyway, I think all that I've said, hopefully leavened by more eminent speakers who are present here, will possibly help us to think better as we move towards Viksit Bharat. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Chinoy, for providing that comprehensive introduction or a teaser to your book. I'm sure everyone within this audience and beyond will want to read this book. And I would encourage everyone here as well as outside to buy copies, because I think it's important to also see the cover. As you said, if only for the cover, because it is indeed a splendid cover. Shri Sanjoy Joshi, Chairman, Observer Research Foundation. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mattu, Ambassador Chinoy, and the IIC for getting me here to talk about this book, The Global Tumult. And yes, actually I was really impressed by the cover for the simple reason that when you start talking about tumult, what does tumult mean? Tumult means any situation which challenges the capacity of the helmsman to be able to commandeer the vessel he is in charge of. It is unprecedented. And the picture actually captures the situation which we find ourselves in today. We live in extremely uncertain times. And uncertain times are the times when, and today's uncertain times especially, are the times when the information or knowledge we have in our possession about our situation is inversely proportional to our understanding of it. The more information we have, the less we understand. And that is also because what has happened to the world of information, what is happening to the world of communication led by technology. And technology, mind you, is a major theme in the book which runs through. When I picked up this book, I did not read it as a collection of essays. I read it as a whole book and what the book implied. And the various strands which go through this book in the various chapters really talk about a tumult which is in many ways, unprecedented. Unprecedented meaning, you have tumults which are basically kind of trying to change gears of where we are, change paradigms, change civilizational possibilities, or what is going to come next. And through these chapters, it's a strand which runs through right across when he talks about defense and security preparedness. There's a huge section on India's defense and security preparedness, where we are, where we've been, what we have gone through. The challenges which countries face today are very, very different from where they were. The challenges are so large that you can sometimes start wondering, what is going to be the future of governance within nations? Is it going to change? Is it going to shift? Where are we headed in this world? See, the global balance of power is shifting. There's no doubt about it. But we say, yes, emerging economies, which so-called label themselves the global south, and we talk about it, are challenging Western-dominated institutions, the power distribution within those institutions, whether they're the MDBs, which he has a chapter on how they're lending, is actually in many ways counterproductive. And why is it counterproductive? He has bits of pieces on that. So globals, MDBs, global governance structures, whether it is UNSC, whether it is other institutions, they are under stress. They are facing a lot of issues in the world today. And at the same time, you have these new wave of technologies coming in, which is disrupting life completely, ordinary life of ordinary citizens. We are not talking about, the armed forces yet. We're not talking about, about industry and what is going to happen to the future of work. We're talking about the lives of ordinary people. Those are getting disrupted on a daily basis. So there are major changes, which in a way are preparing us for a very different kind of wave coming. So this is the major tumult which you are facing today. So on the one hand, you have, yes, artificial intelligence, automation coming up, which is questioning the future of work, the very idea of human effort, and the idea of what is intelligent decision making. Who is going to be taking those decisions, whether in the battlefield, whether at work, or whether in situations of traffic control. Who is taking those decisions? Then it is also redefining the very nature of war and the rules under which that war is going to be fought. And we're seeing it happen right before our eyes. We're seeing it happen in Ukraine, we're seeing it happen in Gaza, in Lebanon, we're seeing it right across. And he has this chapter on COVID-19, what COVID-19 is. See, COVID-19 for the first time actually brought into the minds of the common man for the first time about how advances in the new technologies like CRISPR, gene editing, biohacking tools, it is not just about revolutionizing healthcare. There is a dark side to them, extremely dark side, and they raise deep ethical and security dilemmas. And we saw the disaster that COVID was. COVID for the first time, he talks of supply chains and what happened to supply chains. COVID for the first time showed us that supply chains, the just-in-time supply chains built during globalization, became a liability. And the strongest countries suffered perhaps more in this process. They fared much worse than some of the others. India fared much better. Many other countries in Africa actually fared much better than some of the strongest countries did. Where there was mayhem, complete mayhem, systems broke down, the NHS collapsed in the United Kingdom. The US went through that same anguish during COVID. So the capacity of the most developed nations, people started to ask questions. That there is somewhere a fundamental problem. There's somewhere a fundamental problem. Now, I'm reminded of this book in 1951, Arthur C. Clarke. Not book, it's just a story. The story is called Superiority. And the story is about, it's a story written science fiction. It's about an interstellar war. A future interstellar war between highly developed civilizations, which is taking place. And the story is told from the side of the general who is defeated. He's the narrator. And when he's asked, what led to your defeat? He said, this overwhelming notion of superiority. That we are the best and we have to have the best. We have to have the best in technologies. And that is what actually led to our defeat. Whereas the other side was much more agile, much more nimble, much more practical. They were much more adaptable. And that resilience is what made them win this great battle. So that is where, when you come, and he speaks about the power of asymmetry. Why is asymmetry important? And how has asymmetrical warfare become such an important part of modern warfare? You've seen it happen, if you look at the histories of wars, from Vietnam to Afghanistan to the conflict in Gaza. The strongest side has been dragged out repeatedly. You have seen the Houthis effectively blockade the Red Sea and take on the strongest navies in the world. So that asymmetry is just changing the nature of war. Are our militaries prepared? Are they prepared for the new kinds of warfare? But asymmetry is not just a feature in war. Asymmetry is also a feature in geopolitics. We start talking about the hierarchy of states. We start talking which are the states of the so-called global north, the very strong, the very powerful. Which are the states of the global south? See, size does not really matter. We are actually moving towards a different paradigm in this whole equation, in this whole game. And we started seeing, you see, when multilateral institutions start failing, when the UNSC is not even able to conduct basic diplomacy, forget conflict resolution, out of the question. But even basic diplomacy they cannot conduct. Then people start looking at alternate forums. And that is what you start seeing happening across the world. What happened in the G20? See, G20, the year after, I think, December 2020, COVID struck. A few months before that, Indonesia had taken on the presidency of the G20. And, I'm talking about just before the Ukraine war. Just before the Ukraine war, Indonesia takes the presidency post-COVID of the G20. COVID has already disrupted supply chains, taught us that supply chains are a liability. And then Indonesia takes the presidency, Ukraine war happens, and there is mayhem. G20 practically is on the verge of breakdown. That is the situation we are in. Because the West insists that Indonesia withdraw its invitation to President Putin. Indonesia refuses. He says, yes, we condemn the war in Russia. We're all they condemn the war, the aggression which Russia has undertaken, but that does not become a reason to disinvite President Putin or the Russians to the G20. It's a G20 where the 20 leaders don't even agree to have the pictures taken together. That's the state it is in. And yet Indonesia forges a common consensus, a common declaration. From there, you come to India's presidency of the G20. Now, India completely changes the game. And please read the part which he has on the G20 and what happened at the G20. India completely changes the game. India democratizes G20. G20 is not about the countries with the highest GDP. That is a wrong idea. That is a wrong paradigm, India says. This is a people's G20. This is a world's G20. So India begins with the summit of the Global South. That's how G20 begins. And not only that, it is not just the president, the prime ministers and the finance ministers who are important. The T20, the Think 20, of which he was the chairman, by the way, Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, the T20 becomes a force of its own and creates ideas. It's a Think 20, creates ideas as to what should be the agenda of the G20. It's a very, the discussions which involve lots of universities, discussions which involve lots of think tanks. A number of people across countries, not just in India, get involved in the process of the G20. Now that was a real democratization. Diplomacy can be conducted in various ways. And there are things which multilateral institutions need to learn from many of the institutions which exist in these countries, like India. So that is a big difference which India made to the G20. The Ukraine war begins, something else happens. Supply chains which COVID had made a liability became a weapon. Now that was the big shock, that anything could be weaponized. Energy could be weaponized, your Financial flows could be weaponized. The SWIFT system completely stopped and blocked. And people, nations made barriers with disastrous effects on the global economy, irrespective of the consequences. So what had happened? There was some major disconnect happening in the world. And that is the kind of global tumult we find ourselves in today. You look at the wars raging around, whether it is Lebanon, Gaza, what is happening in Ukraine, there are no limits. There are no conventions. There's no Geneva Convention which controls any of these wars. There's no semblance of any international order or a rules-based international order. So yes, there is a problem. Now, what do the alternate fora? You said that, one American scholar refused to endorse the book and write 4 lines about it. There's a reason for that. See, the reason for that is that you're seeing them caught in an extremely binary kind of thought. The binary kind of thought is, okay, right and wrong, and this has always been the problem. Western thinking is very Cartesian thinking. I think, therefore I am. There's always a duality. It is about, yes and no. This is me, this is not me. So there's always, this is us, this is them, this is somebody else. So the whole idea about categorizing things, labeling things, putting names onto things, and slotting them into baskets, that is the Western idea of knowledge. Now when he talks about Dvaita and Vedanta, what is it? What is Advaita? Advaita is the oneness, the essential oneness of things. There is not a duality. It does not have to be right and wrong. No, there can be nuances. There can be different positions. And that is actually not just the India way, that is the Eastern way. That is also the way of the yin and the yang, which come together. The positive and negative are not really opposed. So they make a composite whole, and you need to understand that composite whole if you need to get on with things in this world. That is a different kind of diplomacy. That is a different kind of international relations which you need to work towards. So that is what is really the idea of India, the India way. Why India is again a pole star, not the pole star, mind you. It is a pole star. There are other stars in the firmament.
And I did that deliberately.
Exactly. See, there are, it is not the pole star, it is a pole star. There are many others. And they all need to come together to have this vision. So that is why I recommend this book. You must go through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay Joshi ji, for those extremely thoughtful remarks. And I think one common theme that emerges clearly is how, in some ways, if there is a central theme about this book, apart from the range of interesting ideas related to multiple issues facing the globe, it is this idea of how international relations itself needs to be decolonized. That we need to have a fresh perspective, an Indian perspective, a non-Western perspective. And in my earlier youthful years, I would have asked you to name and shame the Western, but I'll not embarrass you and ask you to do that. But it's Alexander Dugin was here the other day in JNU, and he talked about the importance of how Russia and India must engage together in this decolonization of international relations. Of course, the Russians have their own understanding of history, but when we do it, we do not do it from a nativist fashion, but as a way of providing a fresh, non-binary interpretation, which is non-zero sum in many ways. The whole idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is a non-zero sum idea of how dependent we are on each other for a sustainable planet. Let me, without further ado, now open this floor for discussion after you heard 2 stellar speeches, an introductory speech by Ambassador Sujan Chinoy, and a fantastic response by Shri Sanjay Joshi. So, Ambassador.
Sinha, former Chief
Information Commissioner. What happens is that I'm aware of Ambassador Sinha's stellar achievements, including as Chief Information Commissioner, as Ambassador to Latin America, I think. UK. Also UK and Latin. Where in Latin America were you, sir?
Venezuela.
Venezuela. However,
his other last an abiding achievement is being my friend.
but his
Sujan,
greatest.
don't steal my thunder. I have to speak.
But I think, unfortunately for him, I know him as probably the greatest thinker, general who India produced in modern times. His son, which is General S.K. Sinha, who was my chancellor of the University of Jammu when I joined. And I have never, and I'll go on record, seen a more exceptional person in terms of his understanding of international relations, in terms of his memory, where he would give a lecture for 1 hour, go back, dictate it out, every comma, every full stop would come back. So I respect you, sir, for your achievements, but also because you're a son of an absolutely formidable father.
Thank you, Professor Matu. Now you put me under a lot of pressure, but I wanted to make a brief comment, if I may, and not a question really. So earlier this week, I was at a conclave in Ahmedabad on Vasudeva Kutumbakam, geopolitics, unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar world. So during my talk, I mentioned that there is this author hailing from Rajkot in Gujarat, and I was in Ahmedabad. Not too many Gujaratis joined the Foreign Service, but this gentleman did. And I met him on the 27th of August 1981 in South Block. We were probationers together, and since then, I've known him very intimately, very closely. So I did mention that, and they were very happy. And of course, they asked me what has he written in the book. I said, please read it because I haven't as yet. But on a lighter note, it's a wonderful cover, Sujan. You know, I had written an article on India-Sri Lanka relations, Naragalia, and the crisis that they faced 2 years ago. And someone asked me to write a book, and the picture I had in mind was a ship on a stormy sea, the perfect storm. It was. But you've stolen that idea from me, Sujan, so I kind of have to find something else. But congratulations, and it's really wonderful listening to the two eminent speakers, Professor Mattu and Mr. Joshi, and I look forward to reading the book and then sounding more knowledgeable at your next book reading. Thank you.
Yes, please, sir. So please introduce yourself as well.
Well, good evening. I'm Dr. Merchant. I'm with the Baha'i Lotus Temple, but I'm also a social worker focusing on the areas of environment, education, and the interfaith movement. It was very brilliant listening to all three of you, very distinguished friends. I feel also humbled to ask this question. But recently at the the General Assembly meeting on the International Day of Peace, the United Nations and all the member states came up with something called the Global Compact. You know, they came up with a new pact for the future, following from the Summit of the Futures. Now, we talk about multilateralism, and they all focus that this has to be a multilateral initiative, and closely related to this would be two other pacts, the Digital Pact, as well as there was a declaration of the future generations. And I read a little bit about it, but I wanted the profound insights of Ambassador Sujan and also Professor Mattu, yourself, and our distinguished person who discussed, again, Mr. Sujan Joshi, Doctor. So it's a very important thing because future generations, while we are on the brink of World War III, less than 90 seconds from doomsday, as per the Security Board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And yet, we are hopeful, and we pray that India's contribution in field of multilateralism, the concept of Vasudeva Kutumbakam, and the Vedanta paradigm, the Eastern worldview, if it can be made something worldwide, would it bring a change from the catastrophes that are looming in the horizon? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Exposition, sir. Sir, I particularly liked your interpretation of this international order in Tamasic, Rasic, and Sattvic lights. So, in that light, I would like to know, so what future role and future do you envisage for India or pole star, a great power or great society? Because that interpretation seems to foreclose the possibility of India being a great power. But can India afford to be a great society without being a great power?
I think ma'am, need to conclude by 7 o'clock? Is that the deadline? Yeah. Is there any other question? And I'll invite yes, please, introduce yourself and you, sir, after that.
I'm Shruti Pandale with IDSA. Good to see you, DG. Congratulations, sir, once again. I thought it'd be a wonderful, and Professor Mattu and Dr. Sanjay Joshi, great to see you again. I thought it'd be a great opportunity to sort of hear all of your views as to when Ambassador Chinoy talks about India as a pole star, it's also about how we sort of are creating our own identity in the global stage. And so you spoke about it when we were talking about India not being anti-West, but how we're describing ourselves as non-West. So I would take the opportunity to ask all three of you as to what would be the elements of this sort of identification when we talk about ourselves as non-West.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have the gentleman with the... yes, sir, for you. And then I'll just have two other questions. In 30 seconds each, please.
Farid Jaffa, former Deputy Comptroller and Auditor General of India. Dr. Joshi, one thing which was on my mind is that in our, as we are seeking to progress towards becoming a pole star, what would be the three top India-specific factors which could be black swan moments or even not black swan factors which could stymie this journey?
Yeah, him and then you, but 30 seconds, sir. I'm just going to be a very hard taskmaster.
Congratulations again, sir.
To introduce yourself, sir.
We have Nagam research with IDSA.
But then you can ask the question in IDSA. Okay. Mike.
The global powers are basically known for create global orders, as you know. So my question is, how would you place India as an effective balancer or as an international order creator at this moment?
Good question. Yeah, please, final.
My name is Dr. Sarojit Dudeja. Mr. Chinoy, are you trying to establish India as a Vishwaguru through your writings?
Good. Now we have, even though the ISC is not imposing deadlines, as a chair, I think I have to put deadlines. So we'll conclude by 7:10. So I will give 2 minutes each to my distinguished fellow panelists and 2 minutes to myself. So by 7:10, we'll have concluded this. So would you like, Chairman Joshi, in the style of Chairman Mao? Okay. Chairman Joshi, you go first and then...
Well, Professor Mattu, that's a tall order. There have been lots of very good questions which have come from across the table. To handle them in 2 minutes, so I'll pick what I can. One question was addressed directly to me, so let me start with that. That actually ties up with the question we heard from here. Great power and great society. What is the difference? How does one become a great power? What is there to be in great society? And that is where the challenge really lies for any country, not just India. It is today also being faced by the United States of America, for that matter. To remain a great power and remain a socially cohesive entity and not be fractured within yourselves. That is the first fundamental for any great power or great society. That is the most important thing. Second, India's unique challenge, and different countries have the same challenge in a different context, is going to be demographics. India reaches a demographic peak by 2040. Now, this is also India's moment in the sun. In a traditional economy, it would have been India's moment in the sun because this is the time when its economy should be peaking and reaching its highest point. After that, your demographic dividend starts to plateau and then flatten out, and you then get into the next cycle where you are the dependence ratio keeps on increasing. So between now and 2040 is India's opportunity. Now the challenge is coming from the other side, where you may not be able to find productive employment. So it's the exact opposite challenge. The demographic divide becomes a demographic curse. And you are not being able to generate enough jobs, and that again leads to a situation where you do not remain a cohesive society. Back to that point. So these are the two fundamental challenges, I would say, which India faces, and it needs to navigate and handle these challenges.
Sir,
very quickly,
I think the world has moved seamlessly from the Atlantic Charter in 1942 to the UN Charter to, in fact, not just the recent compact at the Summit of the Future, but if you recall, in 2020, 75th anniversary of the United Nations, there was also a similar document. All of them are fairly identical. In other words, there is nothing that you can reinvent in terms of what's good and pro bono. And the problem is in the implementation in an equal and fair manner, the tenets and principles of all these documents. As far as, Sattvic, great power, rich power is concerned, I feel India's greatness will not necessarily come from being the wealthiest country in the world, but from being able to ensure Sarvodaya internally and externally to point to a human-centric approach. Somewhere in this space will lie our greatness. Neighbors, we cannot decide what policies they will follow, nor should we try to dictate terms to them. I don't think any great power has risen without some kind of conflict within the region. What we should try and do is to develop a greater consensus on our own rise. And that attempt is being made. The time frame in which you are judging it is too short, 10 years. We are a non-Western power. We are not anti-Western. And I think we are also not in the category of a rising power that rejects all Western intellectual progress. I think India has been deft in that regard. It's multi-layered, and so it should remain. Gold buying and all that, you please ask the ladies in the room. I can't judge that. I'm sure Professor Mattu will answer the rest of the questions. I will simply mention one point here, that no, I don't think India should be placing itself as a Vishwa Guru. As a Vishwa Vaidya, yes, as a Vishwa Vaidya. I had spoken and written about this earlier, that COVID gave us a time, gave us an opportunity to become a physician to the rest of the world if our credentials were not already well established as the world's largest manufacturer of generic and cheaper, as in affordable drugs. But we should be placing ourselves as a Vishwamitra. That's going to be more acceptable. That'll rub fewer people as we rise. Thank you.
Let me, in conclusion, really respond in some fashion to the profound questions, but really also to once again recommend this book wholeheartedly. I think the question asked about the black swan events that could hinder, hamper, or box in India. I think the strength of India, ironically, is that it has grown so organically in such a messy fashion that no black swan event is possible. A black swan event is an unpredictable, rare, unforeseen event. Now, the scenario that Sanjay Joshi described as your demographic dividend becoming a demographic nightmare. However, that's happening in places already. It is predictable. You know, if you don't provide skills, jobs, opportunities, values of global citizenship, your young, unemployed, unskilled workers will haunt you. But it's hardly unpredictable. COVID was unpredictable, and yet we seem to have overcome past COVID with relatively less harmed than most other countries. Frankly speaking, I would like to think of what would be short of a world war in which there's a nuclear explosion, what would be an unpredictable, unforeseen event that the most cynical observers of India couldn't have predicted?
A pandemic that lays everybody low?
Yeah, but that's what I said. COVID was the ultimate, where you could go out, catch an infection, and die at home without anyone attending. We've gone through that. So I just cannot. I think the strength of India is exactly this, which people used to ask in 47, is how can India survive as a democracy? Because how can a subcontinent full of such heterogeneity, with such great mass deprivation, survive. No democracy had survived till then in the same conditions as India did, and yet India did despite all these odds. So I think India will survive like a bullock cart going along, maybe not as fast as a Porsche. I think that is a great sense, and that's where I think the strength of India is not to be a preacher, but to be a friend, to be a counsel, to be a guide, to be a charioteer when needed. Maybe if you were to ask me, I would have, but that was too cliched a picture. I would have had a Rath in the Mahabharata with Krishna as the charioteer and India representing the chariot and guiding. But that is too much of the Bhagavad Gita image that you might carry back with you. So this is a much more, in some way, much more secular, cosmopolitan reflection of the essential message, because that is it, that there is a certain message which India brings to the world, but that message has to be given to only those who are eager to learn. It doesn't have to be imposed. Only when you are faced with these dilemmas and you ask Krishna, does Krishna tell you? He doesn't volunteer this information. Yeah. So we can't be a self-proclaimed guru or a Vishwa guru until someone comes and says, after all, there has to be a certain value to the advice that you give, and that value comes only when you recognize the power of that advice, which what Duryodhana didn't realize when he asked for Krishna's army and Arjuna asked for just, Yudhishthira asked for just Krishna himself as guiding us. So I think there lies the great philosophical strength of India, not in terms of believing that we are the greatest, but that we have our own way, and there is a way in which you have to realize that there is no just Western way. And that is where I think the Western narrative in international relations is so ossified. Every concept that you think, which we took for granted, which I taught for years, which I learned for so many years in England and in India, from sovereignty to territoriality to whole idea of citizenship, nationhood, are all borrowed ideas from the West. When there is so much, I'm not saying that these are the final thoughts or that we invented everything from astrophysics to
borrowed from the East. Borrowed from the East.
Borrowed from the East, yeah. Borrowed from the East, that there is so much strength in Indian wisdom. So this is a book which will at least help you comprehend today and help you go back and dwell deeper into what Ambassador Chinoy has really given you a feel for in his remarkable essays. I must say that I was always impressed by his leadership. I am now inspired by his intellect. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you very much.